I would have been a draft dodger in the Vietnam War. I'm making this video so that I can sort out why I feel that way and why this is a part of my identity. Now, I know that this isn't that edgy to say in the year 2018. It was a much different situation during the Vietnam War to be a draft dodger, to flee to Canada, flee to some different country to avoid having to go fight in the Vietnam War. I want to tell you my story and why I feel this way, and you'll understand more about me as a person. So here we go. This would have been like 1992, 1993. I was in 6th grade. I was watching The Wonder Years with my dad. And I want to point out, my dad was born in 1956, which is the same year that Kevin Arnold on the show was born. So whatever year it was on the show, in The Wonder Years, my dad was the same exact age as Kevin Arnold was in real life. So the fictional character of Kevin Arnold today would be what, 61 years old, the age of my dad. So that was something interesting about The Wonder Years, because that show was like real for my dad. He was the same age as Kevin Arnold, right? Okay. So watching this episode, Wayne, who's Kevin's older brother, he has a friend who gets drafted in the war and doesn't come back. He's killed in the war. So I'm asking my dad these questions about Vietnam War. This is the first I really knew anything about Vietnam War. I'm asking my question to my dad, and my dad explained to me that my dad was born in 1956. He could have been drafted for the war, but it ended right as he was becoming old enough to do it. So had he been born a year earlier, or had the war ended a year later, he would have been a prime candidate. My research and understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't make these videos so that I can teach you at all. I make them so that I can learn. My understanding about the way the draft worked was that if you were married, at least middle class income, and had been to college, then you were much less likely to be drafted for the war. On the other hand, if you had not been to college and you were lower income and by default, therefore a minority, you were much more likely to be drafted for the war. My dad wasn't able to go to college, and he was lower income. And he was, at the time, he was the right age. So he easily could have and probably would have been drafted, but it ended just in time. I might not have existed had the war not ended when it was. My dad may have been sent off to war and never come back. So it really became real for me that night that I watched that episode of The Wonder Years with my dad. And then he explained to me, I said, well, as a boy, I said, well, what if you didn't want to fight in the war? What would happen? He's like, well, you could have been arrested, or you could have tried to flee to Canada and avoid it altogether and just hide out there. And that's when I decided, as a 12-year-old boy in the early 90s, okay, then that's what I would have done. I would have fled to Canada, and I would have rode out the storm there, and I would have come back when I could have come back. But I wouldn't have given my life to that war. And I think that moment, as I'm saying this now, making this video, a light bulb just came on. I think that that ultimately shaped me politically. Let me share with you, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm apolitical by default, therefore I am libertarian. And I feel that with a libertarian mindset, I can 100% support the men and women who fight in the American military. I support those human beings, those people, those men and women who have families and sacrifice so much for our military. I 100% support them. But at the same time, I don't 100% support the wars that we're fighting. I don't. And I think that that's possible without it being a paradox. You can support the human beings who fight for our military, the Americans who fight, without supporting the wars. Because I think that's part of the concept. I think Americans are supposed to be blinded to believe that whatever America is doing overseas, fighting these wars, and notice how I said overseas, we're fighting overseas wars is what we're doing. We're not fighting them on our land. We're fighting overseas wars. As we're fighting these overseas wars, we're not really supposed to question our government, Uncle Sam, as far as what's going on over there, as far as our involvement. We just have to assume that we're on the right side of things and we're doing the right thing, what's best for those people that we're fighting for. Ultimately, we're fighting for America. We're fighting for our freedom. And that's what the concept. But as a libertarian, I don't buy into that system. I 100% support our military, the men and women who fight, but I don't support the wars that we fight in. Okay? So to further this concept, I want to share the lyrics of a Metallica song with you because I think it's very relevant. Metallica has a history of, I feel, sharing my same perspective on war and politics, and that is to not be political, to be apolitical, to stand back and have a third-party perspective and think, I don't want to buy into just one concept. I don't want to just vote for one candidate or have to believe in this boxed-in system, one or the other, A or B. What if I don't even want to choose C? What if I just want to stand back and have my own opinion? Metallica has a theme on most of their albums. They have at least one song about war, like Master of Puppets from 1985. They had, what did they have? They had Disposable Heroes, right? It really reminds me so much of our involvement in Vietnam, right? Well, on the Black Album, they had a song called Don't Tread on Me. And when you see the title of the song, the first time you buy that, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a very pro-military song. But when you really read the lyrics and know the way that they question things in other albums and other songs with the war, you realize that's probably not exactly the perspective. The title is misleading. Here it is. Don't tread on me. Here's the lyrics. Quote, liberty or death, what we so proudly hail. Once you provoke her, talking about the United States as a nation, rattling of her tail, never begins it, never, but once engaged, never surrenders, showing the fangs of rage. Don't tread on me. So be it. Threaten no more. Check out this line. To secure peace is to prepare for war. So be it. Settle the score. Touch me again. For the words that you'll hear evermore, don't tread on me. Love it or leave it. She with the deadly bite, quick as the blue tongue, forked as the lightning strike. Shining with brightness, always on surveillance. The eyes that they never close, emblem of vigilance. End quote. I mean, from there it's saying basically the same things over and over. But if you just heard that song and oh, don't tread on me, this is very pro-military. But then I think the giveaway is where it says to secure peace is to prepare for war. That's very telling of how they actually feel. And then the other part where it says to secure peace is to prepare for war. See, and I already said it. I said, especially for someone of my generation, I'm seeing our military fight wars overseas with the understanding it's to secure peace for America, and we're fighting for freedom here in America. So like even in World War II, when we were attacked, Hawaii was attacked, right? That was attacked before Hawaii even became a state. It didn't become a state until 1959. But it was American, but it was, that was us being attacked. And then of course 9/11, when the planes hit the towers in New York City. Okay, all right, well that was us being attacked. But that's the closest thing that we can really get to us being attacked. But it's enough to propel this storyline that we are fighting for our freedom. When in reality, are we? Or do we always need to have an enemy to fight? Was it convenient that we had the communists to fight there for a while? It helped get us to Vietnam, right? Is it convenient that since 9/11, we've been vaguely fighting these Muslim terrorists? And we're, as Americans, almost taught to believe that all Muslims are terrorists, when I totally do not believe that. Some of the kindest people I've ever met are Muslims. So I feel that it's no paradox and it's not unpatriotic to say, hey, I'm all for the men and women who serve our country in the military. But I have some serious doubts and questions about the wars we're fighting. I think on a global scale, people watching this video who aren't Americans would say, yeah, Nick's proven some good points. He's saying some things that Americans don't usually say. Because is it America's job to, as the Metallica song says, to have surveillance all over the whole world to make sure the rest of the world behaves? To make sure that those Muslim terrorists don't mess things up. Meanwhile, and of course I saw this little Instagram picture. It was showing basically how to know you're a terrorist. And it had like it was like a shades of different skin color. So like it stopped at my skin color basically and said anybody my skin color or whiter, we're the ones more likely to be the crazy guy going in, taking a gun into a school or a church and killing people, being crazy. That's what kind of terrorism my skin color indicates. But you get much darker than me, then you're some kind of Muslim terrorist, whether you came from Russia or Somalia or somewhere in the Middle East, you're automatically that kind of terrorist. See, that's how I see things. I see it more balanced. We can generically say, we're always fighting those terrorists. But then I'm like, but here in America, we've got terrorists too, and it's not about some kind of... So for me, that's how I see things. And I'm wondering how unpopular what I'm saying is how it's going to be received to everybody watching. Because I've got Americans watching. I've got people overseas watching. But here's what I'm saying. I support the men and women who fight in our military. But I think it's important that we're open-minded enough to question our involvement in wars and our place in the war, in the wars and the world, and realizing, is it truly unpatriotic to say, you know what, I've got some questions about our involvement in lots of these wars we've been having over the past couple of decades. And yeah, I would not have been willing to sacrifice my life for the Vietnam War. And at the same time, nothing but respect for all the men who did that and women who did that. But is it so shameful for me to say I wouldn't have been willing to do that, why I would respect the people who did? That's where I'm at. I'm apolitical. I'm a libertarian. How do you feel about the things I've said today? I'm curious how this is perceived. See, this is how I feel, and I don't think that how I feel is going to change. I've felt this way since I was in 6th grade. That I don't buy into whatever our government says that we should do, that we should automatically do it as we, in some way, we're fighting for our freedom. What if we're not doing a good enough job of taking care of our own people? What if? And I'm not saying that from some kind of welfare perspective of, remember, I'm not a liberal, I'm not a Democrat. But what if we're not doing a good enough job of taking care of our own people here? As we have serious issues with obesity, and yet at the same time, people are going to bed hungry. Like, what about that? What if we're not doing a good enough job of taking care of our own people? What if we're spending a lot of money and we're spending human lives on taking care of the rest of the world? I'm a libertarian. I'm not political, but this is how I feel. I'm curious to know how you feel about how I feel in the comments.